When I was younger, I remember going on a family trip from our country town to Melbourne just to go to the observation deck at the Rialto. After spending a few hours on the V line, we walked up Collins Street to view the then tallest building in the Southern Hemisphere. At the time, I didn't know, but the Rialto skyscraper is named after an 1891 building which almost didn't survive. It's actually part of one of Melbourne's most contested heritage precincts. Today, I'm checking out the Rialto skyscraper, the heritage buildings which stand in front of it, and a few other buildings we sadly lost over time. If you're new here, hello, I'm Ken and I make videos about history, infrastructure, architecture and the environment. Thanks for joining me. In today's video, I'm diving into the history of these 5 interconnected buildings, known as the Rialto Building Group, the preservation battle to keep them, the eventual construction of the Rialto Towers, and some of my own observations. The Rialto Building Group sits on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. Around this area, which is slightly elevated and less flood-prone to areas closer to the Yarra, the land was a thoroughfare for inland travel. After colonisation, the next hype of activity in the Collins Street area was in the 1880s. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the boom period. I'm referring to the Melbourne land boom which happened from around 1883 to 1891. It was an intense period of property speculation and rapid suburban expansion, driven by the gold rush and huge foreign investment. It earned the city a title you've likely heard before, Marvellous Melbourne. The rapid growth saw land prices rival London. Huge sums of money were poured into opulent new buildings along Collins Street, but it all crashed in 1891 and a severe decade-long economic depression followed. Collins Street became a financial and commercial spine during the land boom. It was the address of banks, insurance, wool brokers and the like. The grand architecture of the buildings around here was used to signal trust and stability. Now there are quite a few historic buildings I'm going to mention. The Rialto Building Group consists of the Record Chambers, the New Zealand Chambers, the Alderfleet, the Winfield and the Rialto. Just a few doors down from the Rialto Building Group was the Robs Building and the Federal Coffee Palace. And along King Street was the York Butter Factory and the Robs Building Annex. Got it? I'll do my best to explain, so stick with me. I'll start by exploring the history of the Rialto Building Group. One of the first buildings in the group was the Record Chambers, built in 1887. The building was named after the Australasian Insurance and Banking Record, a Melbourne-based publication that reported on banking and insurance. The building was designed by John Augustus Bernard Koch, a prominent architect who previously served as the city architect for Melbourne and even served as mayor of Richmond. The Record Chambers are a great example of the free classical style that was popular at the land boom time. Just next door is the New Zealand Chambers, completed in 1888, and was designed by the architecture firm Oaken, Addison and Kemp. The building is notable for its early and extensive use of terracotta tiles, making it one of the first buildings in Melbourne to use the material so prominently. These tiles were sourced locally from Brunswick by Ferry Pottery, who were predecessors to Victorian art pottery, a practice that created detailed ceramic sculptures which you can see at the NGV. The Alderfleet building was completed in 1890. It was commissioned by businessman Patrick McCann and designed by William Pitt, the same architect responsible for the Melbourne Stock Exchange and the safe deposit buildings nearby, both of which featured in my Gothic Bank video. The building is designed in a Gothic Revival or Venetian Gothic style, depending on who you ask. Pitt focused on depth and detail rather than height. Originally, the building extended all the way through to Flinders Lane. An early tenant of the building was the Melbourne Harbour Trust, a predecessor to the Melbourne Port Authority, which was looking for offices close to the Yarra River. In fact, its proximity to the Yarra River made it particularly attractive to agents involved in trade, including the Pastoralists Union and the Victorian Shipwreck Relief Society. The wool trade was central to this part of Collins Street, and in 1891, the Winfield Building, once known as the Wool Exchange, was built. The building is believed to have been Melbourne's first purpose-built wool exchange and auction house. Before the Winfield Building, wool auctions took place at the nearby Olderfleet Building. It was designed by architects Charles Diebro and Richard Speight Jr. and is considered one of the best examples of the Queen Anne style in Victoria. Inside there's a bit of an illusion. Only the front portion of the building facing Collins Street is original. The rear section was replaced by a 14-storey extension in 1984 during the site's redevelopment as a hotel. The extension mirrors the scale and rhythm of the original Rialto building, which is opposite, and I think it creates a really dramatic atrium space which looks great. Though I do have some sad news about this building to share later in this video. Patrick McCann and William Pitt's second major collaboration after the Olderfleet was the Rialto building, completed in 1891. Designed in a Venetian Gothic palazzo style, the building remains essentially in its entirety. It is not just a facade. The long eastern side is now incorporated into that glazed atrium I talked about before. At ground level, new bluestone tiles cover the original cobbled laneway, which once served horse-drawn carts delivering wool and other goods to the building's warehouses. Early tenants in the 1890s included the newly established Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works, who were responsible for providing Melbourne with a water and sewage system, as well as the law firm of Theodore Fink, a prominent figure in many of the criminal trials that followed the land boom crash, where bankers and company directors faced charges for fraud and conspiracy. There are a few other important buildings in the streetscape that I wanted to mention. On King Street stands the York Butter Factory, built in 1852. The Victorian Heritage Council notes it is one of the oldest warehouses in central Melbourne, with a rich history of manufacturing, including, of course, butter making. At the corner of Collins and King Street stood the Robs Building, built in 1885. It was made from bluestone from the country town of Malmesbury and was a premier 5-storey office space and warehouse building. It had 5 bays on its eastern side, but by the 70s, only 3 bays remained. And just opposite the Robs Building stood the Federal Coffee Palace and Hotel. It was completed in 1888 and was strategically planned to be inaugurated at the same time as Melbourne's Centennial Exhibition. It was an elaborate 500-plus room temperance hotel. In other words, it was alcohol-free. The Federal Coffee Palace and Hotel was apparently the grandest product of the late 19th century temperance movement in the Southern Hemisphere, and, according to some newspapers, one of the largest and most opulent buildings in the world at the time. The close proximity of these highly ornate historic buildings would have made an incredible streetscape. The scale and detail they achieved are simply no longer economically viable, which only deepens the sense of loss knowing not all of them survived. By the 1970s, Melbourne was losing historic buildings at an extraordinary pace. For the previous 2 decades, the general attitude was that the city looked tired. Historic buildings were seen as dark and unfashionable. That mindset accelerated after the 1956 Olympics, when the city was suddenly on display to the world. Around the same time, height restrictions were relaxed, something I cover in my video about ICI House. With those limits gone, skyscrapers began to reshape the skyline, and older buildings were increasingly viewed as obstacles to progress. Whole sections of Melbourne's architectural history were demolished during this period. A tower proposal in the 1970s brought this conflict to a head. It's important to be clear here. The development did not threaten every historic building that I covered earlier, only the Rialto Building, Winfield Building, and Rob's building on Collins Street, along with some warehouses on King Street, including the York Butter Factory. In 1976, the owners at the time, National Mutual, sought approval to demolish the Winfield building. The National Trust pushed back strongly, arguing that the entire group of buildings had value as a streetscape, and that together they told the story of Collins Street during Melbourne's land boom. National Mutual gave up and eventually sold the land to the Grollo Group, who proposed an even bigger skyrise development, the Rialto Towers. The Grollo Group set their sights on the Robs building, which was at high risk of demolition because they argued their skyscraper needed an inviting street presence on the corner of King and Collins Streets. The Trust tried to make similar arguments as they had during the initial demolition threat, describing Robs as an important visual and historical link between the Gothic commercial buildings of Collins Street and the industrial warehouses on King Street. Despite these efforts, preservation at the time was limited by a lack of legal tools. Heritage protection largely focused on individual buildings, not whole precincts, and the result was compromise. A deal was struck with the state government where the Rialto and York buildings were retained, and the Winfield and warehouses on King Street were only partly retained. Sadly, the Robs building was demolished in 1982 to create the plaza that the Grollos wanted. Only a small annex on King Street survived. At the same time, a separate development proposal placed the remaining buildings in the Rialto building group under threat. The New Zealand Chambers, Record Chambers, and the Alderfleet building were all owned by the Hammerson Group, who proposed razing and redeveloping the entire site. In response, a community-led campaign, again spearheaded by the National Trust, emerged, to be known as the Collins Street Defence Movement. Initially, the focus was on saving the Alderfleet building itself, and the Hammerson Group even pledged to retain the entire Alderfleet building. But ultimately, the Hammerson Group demolished all but the front section of the Alderfleet, and then sold it to a developer who completed an extensive redevelopment of these buildings, where only the front portions were retained. That redevelopment was actually not the last change. In 2017, the tower that was built in the 80s was demolished, and a new 38-story tower was completed in 2020. You know how I mentioned the Federal Coffee Palace earlier? Well, sadly, it didn't survive the various preservation battles of the 70s. It was demolished in 1973 to make way for Enterprise House, which only lasted 44 years before it also got demolished in the name of progress. Now on this corner stands a skyscraper with the Amazon logo proudly on display. According to its architects, the tower tries to restore the sense of scale and grandeur of the Federal Coffee Palace. I can't see it, but let me know if you can. The demolition of the Federal Coffee Palace is perhaps Melbourne's most infamous demolition. The main reason I'm mentioning it is because it contributed to an incredible streetscape at one time, and its destruction became a lightning rod for public anger and helped bring the heritage movement to prominence. Interestingly, the preservation battles themselves are now recognised as part of the heritage significance of the surviving buildings. The Victorian Heritage Council notes that places like the Rialto precinct are historically significant not just for what they are, but for the role they played in the emergence of heritage awareness and legislation in Victoria. And so came the Rialto Towers. The Rialto Towers are two conjoined skyscrapers of unequal heights. The taller tower rises 63 stories and is 251 metres high. When it was completed in 1986, it became the tallest building in Australia, a title it held until 1991, and for years after it dominated Melbourne's skyline. The towers were designed by Gerard Depreux and partners, working in association with Perrott Lyon Matheson. The latter are also known for designing the infamous Princess Gate Towers, better known as the gas and fuel buildings where Fed Square now stands. Despite the heritage battles along Collins Street from the years prior, the Rialto emerged as a symbol of confidence and modernity. People believed the incorporation of the original Rialto and Winfield buildings into a hotel was great, and the new atrium space between the two was highly praised. For a long time, the Rialto was the pride and joy of Melbourne, and honestly, I think it's aged gracefully. The blue tone of the apparently 13,000 windows changes throughout the day and looks great at sunset. Its position anchoring the western end of the CBD gives the Rialto a presence that still feels distinctive, even among newer skyscrapers. For years, the tower also had a public observation deck on the 55th floor. I still remember visiting it and looking all the way out to the horizon. The observation deck closed in 2009 and 30 people lost their jobs at the time. It's now a fine dining restaurant and bar. If you can spare an odd $30 for a cocktail, the view is absolutely worth it. In 2018, the Rialto embarked on a revitalization project where a new podium was built at the base of the tower. A lot of online commentary I saw highlighted that this revitalization project shows just how short-sighted the initial demolition of the Robs building was. The new podium would be 5 stories, around the same height as the Robs building, and it was located at the corner of Collins and King Streets, where the Robs building once stood. This project also resulted in the last remaining remnant of the Robs building being demolished, with the annex on King Street now gone. But that's not all for the Rialto precinct. There's currently a permit application for a new tower above the Winfield building, intended to replace the hotel wing on the left side of the atrium I showed you earlier. It's certainly a very different design to the current atrium, but it won endorsement from the City of Melbourne in 2024, and even Mayor Nick Rees endorsed the design of the new tower. The Rialto Towers left a complex legacy. It announced Melbourne's arrival as a global city in the late 20th century, but it also became a symbol of the compromises made between progress and preservation. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've been to the Rialto before, let me know in the comments. If you'd like to support the channel and help me keep making videos like this, there's a link below where you can buy me a coffee. Please also consider giving this video a like or subscribing to my channel to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.